3 missed calls. That is the price of a human life. While Julian Thorne was busy turning off his phone to enjoy a night of illicit passion in a 5-star hotel suite, his 6-year-old son was fighting for every single breath in the back of an ambulance. Julian thought he could play the game, keep the devoted wife, the wealthy father-in-law, and the secret mistress all perfectly balanced. But he made one fatal calculation. He underestimated who his wife's father really was. When the truth comes out, and it always does, it won't just be a divorce. It will be an annihilation. This is the story of how a single night of pleasure destroyed a man's entire existence. The notification light on the iPhone blinked once, a silent, frantic pulse in the dim light of room 402 at the Ritz-Carlton. Julian Thorne didn't look at it. He was too busy tracing the rim of a crystal champagne flute, smiling at the woman sitting across from him. Vanessa Rourke. She was everything his life at home wasn't: spontaneous, dangerous, and demanding of nothing but his attention. She wore a silk robe that slipped just off her shoulder, her dark eyes fixed on him with a predatory adoration. "You promised you'd turn it off," Vanessa whispered, her voice like velvet. She nodded toward the phone on the mahogany nightstand. "No work? No wife? Just us?" Julian glanced at the device. The screen lit up again. Claire Mobile flashed across the display. He felt a momentary twinge of annoyance. Claire, his wife of 8 years. She was probably calling to ask if he had remembered to pick up the dry cleaning, or perhaps Toby was refusing to eat his vegetables again. It was domestic drudgery, the very thing he was paying $600 a night to escape. "Just let me silence it completely," Julian said, his voice smooth. He picked up the phone. It vibrated in his hand, a desperate buzz. He didn't slide to answer. He didn't check the voicemail. He held the power button and the volume button simultaneously until the screen went black. "There," he said, tossing it onto the duvet. "Gone." Vanessa smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now pour me another glass." 5 miles away, the world was ending. Claire Thorne was not calling about vegetables. She was screaming at a frantic pace down I-95, one hand gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckle force, the other clutching her phone, hitting redial for the 4th time. "Pick up, pick up, pick up, damn you, Julian," she sobbed. In the back seat, the wheezing was terrifying. It sounded like a rusty saw cutting through wet wood. Toby, their 6-year-old son, was thrashing against his seatbelt, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. "Mommy!" Toby gasped, the sound barely audible. "Can't breathe!" "I know, baby. I know. We're almost there. Daddy isn't answering, but Mommy is here," Claire screamed, swerving around a slow-moving truck. It had happened so fast. A severe allergic reaction to a mislabeled bakery cookie at a school fundraiser. The EpiPen had jammed a 1 in a million defect, and by the time they got into the car, Toby's throat was closing up. Claire hit redial again. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." The automated voice felt like a slap in the face. Where was he? Julian had said he was working late on the Merriweather account. He should be at the office. He should be at his desk. Why was his phone off? Claire tore into the emergency bay of St. Jude's Hospital, screeching the tires. She didn't wait for a nurse. She scooped Toby up, he was dead weight now, his head lolling back, and ran. "Help somebody, help my son!" The next hour was a blur of white coats, shouting voices, and the ripping of Velcro. Claire stood in the corner of the trauma room, her hands pressed over her mouth, her phone still clutched in her trembling grip. She texted Julian, "Emergency." "St. Jude's. Toby dying. Pick up." Nothing. The message didn't even deliver. A doctor with kind, tired eyes approached her. "Dr. Evans." He pulled down his mask. The room behind him was suddenly very quiet. The chaotic beeping of machines had stopped. "Mrs. Thorne." "Where is he?" Claire whispered. "Is he okay?" Dr. Evans placed a hand on her shoulder. "We did everything we could. The anaphylaxis caused a cardiac arrest. His airway was obstructed for too long." Claire shook her head. No, he's 6. He just started T-ball." "I'm so sorry," Dr. Evans said softly. "Toby is gone." Claire didn't scream. Not yet. She just looked down at her phone. At the dark screen. At the timestamp of her last call to Julian. 8:42 p.m. The exact moment Toby's heart had stopped. Julian had been unavailable. It was 2:00 a.m. when Julian Thorne pulled his BMW into the driveway of their colonial-style home in Greenwich. He felt relaxed, the tension of the work week worked out of his muscles. Vanessa had been exceptional tonight. He checked his phone as he walked up the path. He turned it back on, expecting a barrage of nagging texts. Instead, the phone flooded. 27 missed calls. 14 texts. Not just from Claire, from his mother-in-law, from the hospital. And one from a number he recognized with a cold dread, Silas Sterling. Claire's father. Julian stood on the front porch, the key hovering over the lock. The silence of the house was heavy. It wasn't the silence of sleep. It was the silence of a tomb. He opened the door. The lights were all on. Sitting in the living room armchair, still wearing her coat, was Claire. She was staring at the unlit fireplace. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. Standing by the window, looking out into the darkness, was a man in a dark charcoal suit. He leaned on a cane made of polished ebony. Silas Sterling. The man was a legend in the corporate world, not as a CEO, but as a fixer. He was a forensic auditor who had brought down senators and bank directors. He didn't yell. He didn't make threats. He simply found the one loose thread in a person's life and pulled until they unraveled. "Claire?" Julian asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I saw the calls. My phone died. The charger was in the office, and—" Claire didn't blink. She didn't look at him. Silas turned around slowly. His face was unreadable, a mask of aged granite. "Your phone died, Julian?" "Yes." Julian lied, the fabrication coming easily. "I was at the office. The Merriweather file. I lost track of time and the battery drained. What's going on? Is Toby sick?" Silas walked forward, the cane tapping rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Tap, tap, tap. "Toby isn't sick, Julian. Toby is dead." The world dropped out from under Julian. "What? He died 4 hours ago." Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "An allergic reaction. Claire called you." "Claire called. She called you while he was gasping for air. She called you while the doctors cut his clothes off. She called you when they called the time of death." "No." Julian fell to his knees, a performance of grief that was half real, half panic. "No, oh God, no, my boy." He reached for Claire. "Don't touch me," Claire said. Her voice was raspy. She finally turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were dry. She had cried all her tears at the hospital. Now there was only a cold, hollow void. "Where were you?" "I told you." Julian pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I was at the office. I didn't know if I had known." "The office," Silas repeated. He pulled a silver pocket watch from his vest, checked it, and snapped it shut. "You were at the Sterling Cooper downtown branch?" "Yes, I was alone. I locked up." Silas stared at him. He didn't say, "I know you're lying." He didn't scream, "Liar." He just stared, analyzing Julian like a bug under a microscope. Silas knew the security protocols of that building better than anyone. He owned the security firm that guarded it. "We have to go to the funeral home tomorrow," Silas said, dismissing Julian's outburst. "Go upstairs. Shower. You smell like—" Silas sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring slightly. Hibiscus and stale champagne. Not the smell of a late night at the office. Julian froze. Vanessa wore a perfume called Hibiscus Night. "I had a drink with the client to celebrate finishing the brief," Julian stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Silas walked past him, stopping right at his ear. "My grandson is dead, Julian. If I find out that you were anywhere other than where you say you were, God will not be able to help you. Because he won't get to you before I do." Silas walked out the front door, closing it softly. Julian remained on his knees, shaking. He looked at Claire, but she had already stood up and was walking up the stairs like a ghost. "Claire, please," he whispered. "Sleep in the guest room," she said without looking back. "I can't look at you." As Julian sat there in the empty living room, he pulled his phone out. He hastily deleted the call log. He deleted the texts from Vanessa. "Did you get home safe, lover? 3 delete." He thought he was safe. He thought he had covered his tracks. But he had forgotten one thing. Silas Sterling didn't need a phone to find the truth. Silas Sterling was the kind of man who could read the history of a room just by standing in it. And tonight, he had smelled another woman on his son-in-law, while his daughter smelled of hospital antiseptic. The funeral was set for 3 days later, and those 3 days would be the longest of Julian's life. But the real horror hadn't even started yet. The day of Toby Thorne's funeral was painted in shades of slate gray. A relentless drizzle fell over the cemetery in Greenwich, turning the manicured grass into a slick, muddy carpet. Julian stood next to Claire under a large black umbrella. He was wearing his best suit, a bespoke Tom Ford that cost $4,000. He wore dark sunglasses not to block the sun, but to hide the fact that his eyes weren't red enough. He had practiced his expression in the mirror that morning, a furrowed brow, a tight jaw, the look of a man holding back an ocean of grief. People whispered as they walked past. "Poor Julian. He looks broken. He was working late to provide for them, and now this." Julian absorbed the sympathy like a drug. It was working. The narrative was holding. He was the hard-working father who had been tragically absent, not the adulterous husband who had ignored the call. Claire, however, was statue still. She hadn't spoken to him since the night she returned from the hospital. She stood by the small white casket, her hand resting on the cold wood. She looked frail, her skin translucent against her black dress. Silas Sterling stood 10 feet back. He wasn't under an umbrella. He let the rain hit his face, water dripping from the brim of his hat. He wasn't looking at the coffin. He was scanning the perimeter. Silas had spent 40 years destroying fraudulent companies and corrupt CEOs. He knew that criminals driven by narcissism often returned to the scene of the crime. Or in this case, the scene of the consequence. His eyes narrowed. Across the cemetery, parked on the access road behind a line of oak trees, was a red Mercedes C-Class. The windows were tinted, but the driver's side window was cracked open an inch. A plume of cigarette smoke drifted out. Silas tapped the shoulder of the man beside him, Kyle, his head of security and personal investigator. Kyle was a former intelligence operative, a man who existed in the shadows. "The red Mercedes." Silas murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Get the plate. Find out who is watching my grandson's burial." "Already on it, sir," Cale replied, glancing at his tablet. "Registered to a Vanessa Rourke. 28, marketing director at Horizon Media." Silas stored the name in his mind like a loaded bullet. Vanessa Rourke. As the priest finished the final prayer, "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes," Julian stepped forward to place a single white rose on the casket. He sobbed a loud, ragged sound that made the attendees bow their heads in respect. But Silas saw what others didn't. As Julian wiped his eyes, his hand drifted to his pocket. He checked his phone. A quick, tactile reassurance. He was nervous. After the service, the wake was held at the Thorne residence. The house was filled with casseroles, flowers, and hushed conversations. Julian played the host, perfectly accepting condolences with a tragic nod. "If I had just left work an hour earlier," Julian said to a group of Claire's aunts, his voice breaking. "If I hadn't been so focused on that merger." "You couldn't have known, Julian," Aunt Martha soothed, patting his arm. "You were providing for your family." From the corner of the room, Silas watched. He held a glass of scotch that he hadn't touched. He waited until the crowd thinned, then he walked into Julian's home office. He didn't turn on the light. He walked to the desk. He didn't hack the computer. That was too messy. Instead, he looked at the physical evidence. On the desk sat a parking validation stub. Julian was sloppy. Grief or the performance of it made people careless. Silas picked up the stub. It wasn't from the Sterling Cooper office garage. The office garage used a keycard system that didn't issue paper stubs for employees. This was a thermal paper ticket. "Valet, the Ritz-Carlton Westchester. Check-in 6:15 p.m. Check-out 1:45 a.m. Silas's grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. The timeline. Check-in at 6:15 p.m. Toby went into shock at 8:30 p.m. Julian wasn't at the office. He was at a hotel. Silas slipped the stub into his pocket. He walked out of the office and found Claire sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at an untouched plate of food. "He's lying, isn't he?" Claire asked softly. She didn't look up. Silas pulled a chair out and sat opposite her. "Yes." "He said he was at the office," Claire said, her voice trembling with a rage she was too exhausted to express physically. "But his clothes, he smelled like her. I don't know who she is, Dad, but I know he wasn't working." Silas reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "I found a valet ticket from the Ritz-Carlton in his office, from that night." Claire's head snapped up. The sorrow in her eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, icy hatred. "He was at a hotel while Toby was dying." "Yes." "I want to kill him," she whispered. "I want to scream it to everyone in the other room. I want to destroy him." "No," Silas said firmly. "You will do no such thing. Not yet." "Why?" "He let our son die." "Because," Silas said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register, "if you scream now, he gets a divorce. He gets half the assets. He moves on. He plays the victim. He spins a story that grief drove you crazy." Silas stood up, looming over the table like a dark judgment. "We don't just want him gone, Claire. We want him erased. We want to take his reputation, his money, his future, and his freedom. We are going to let him think he got away with it. We are going to let him get comfortable. And then when he is at his highest point, we are going to cut the string." Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. She took a deep breath. "What do I do?" "You play the grieving widow," Silas instructed. "You let him comfort you. You let him think he's safe. Leave the rest to me. 2 weeks passed. The sharp edge of grief began to dull into a heavy, aching throb for Claire. But for Julian, life was returning to normal with alarming speed. He believed the storm had passed. Claire was quiet, docile even. Silas had stopped coming by the house every day. Julian convinced himself that his lie about the office had worked. After all, who would question a grieving father? On a Tuesday morning, Julian drove to his office at Sterling Cooper Financial. He was up for a promotion to senior partner, a position that came with a $500,000 salary bump and a seat on the board. He felt he deserved it. The tragedy with Toby had actually garnered him sympathy from the senior partners. They looked at him with softer eyes. He closed his office door and immediately dialed Vanessa. "I missed you," he whispered. "I was at the funeral," Vanessa said, her voice pouty. "I saw you with her. You held her hand." "I had to, Ness. It's for appearances. She's a wreck. Once the dust settles, I'll ask for a separation. I just need to secure this promotion first. Silas is the chairman of the board, but he's semi-retired. If I get the senior partner role, I'll have my own leverage." "I hate waiting," Vanessa sighed. "Meet me the usual place. Lunch." "I can't today. Too risky. But soon." Julian hung up, feeling in control. Across town, in a building that looked like a fortress of glass and steel, Silas Sterling sat in a room surrounded by monitors. This was the headquarters of his private consulting firm. "Report," Silas said. Cale stepped forward, projecting an image onto the main screen. It was a timeline. "We have everything, sir. I spoke to the shift manager at the Ritz-Carlton. A little donation to their security upgrade fund went a long way. We have the footage." On the screen, a grainy black and white video played. Timestamp 8:40 p.m. 2 minutes before Toby died. The video showed the hallway of the 4th floor. A waiter was delivering a tray of champagne and oysters to room 402. The door opened. Julian Thorne stood there, wearing a hotel robe, laughing. He took the tray. Behind him, Vanessa Rourke walked by, wearing lingerie. "We also pulled the cell tower data," Cale continued. At 8:42 p.m., when Claire called him for the 3rd time, his phone pinged the tower nearest the hotel. Then it went dead, manually powered down. Silas stared at the screen. He turned it off. He didn't just miss the call. He saw it ringing and turned it off. "Correct," Cale said. "We also did a deep dive into his financials. He's been siphoning money from the joint account he shares with Claire to pay for gifts for Ms. Rourke. Cartier bracelets, the hotel rooms, a lease on her Mercedes. It's all there. But," Cale paused, "there's something else." "Go on." "Julian has been cooking the books on the Merriweather account. He's been inflating the projected returns to boost his quarterly bonuses. It's subtle, but it's fraud. If this comes out, he doesn't just lose his job. He goes to federal prison." Silas leaned back in his leather chair. A cruel, satisfied smile touched his lips. "He thinks he's getting a promotion on Friday," Silas said. "Is he?" Cale asked. "Oh yes," Silas said. "We are going to let him believe he has won the world. I want him to stand on the podium. I want him to taste the victory. And then I want to watch him choke on it." Silas picked up his phone and dialed the current CEO of Sterling Cooper, a man named Arthur. "Arthur, it's Silas." "Silas, good to hear from you. How is the family holding up?" "We are managing," Silas said smoothly. "Listen, regarding the senior partner decision on Friday, I've been thinking. Julian, he needs a win. He needs something to focus on after the loss of his son. I think we should announce it at the quarterly board meeting. Make a spectacle of it. Invite the press. Stream it to the regional offices. Let's honor his resilience." "That's a wonderful idea, Silas," Arthur agreed. "We'll set it up. A big celebration." "Perfect," Silas said. "I'll be there personally to present it." He hung up. The trap wasn't just set, it was baited with poison. Friday arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine. The Sterling Cooper headquarters was buzzing. The quarterly board meeting was usually a dry affair, but today rumors were flying that Julian Thorne was being crowned the new prince of the firm. Julian dressed with meticulous care. He wore a navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that Toby had given him for Father's Day the year before. He wore it not out of sentiment, but because he knew it would play well with the board. The grieving father soldiering on. He arrived at the boardroom on the top floor. The room was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. 50 people were present, the board of directors, key stakeholders, and senior management. A video crew was setting up to live stream the event to the company's 3,000 employees worldwide. Julian took his seat near the head of the table. He felt a vibration in his pocket. A text from Vanessa. "Good luck, baby. Celebrate tonight, 3." He smiled discreetly and texted back, "Champagne is on ice." Arthur, the CEO, stood up at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. It has been a challenging quarter, but also one of triumph. Today we want to honor a man who has shown incredible fortitude." Arthur gestured to Julian. "Julian, please come up here." Julian stood up. Applause broke out. He walked to the front, shaking hands, feigning humility. "Julian has led the Merriweather account to record highs," Arthur said. "And despite a personal tragedy that would have broken a lesser man, he has remained dedicated to this firm. It is my honor to announce his promotion to senior partner." The applause grew louder. Julian stepped to the microphone. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is for my son, Toby. I know he's watching down on me." From the back of the room, a cane tapped against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound cut through the applause like a knife. The room went silent. Silas Sterling stood up from the shadows in the back corner. He walked slowly toward the front. "Silas," Arthur said, smiling. "I didn't know you'd be speaking." "I have a few words to add," Silas said. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. Julian felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. He hadn't expected Silas to be here. Silas reached the podium. He didn't look at the audience. He looked directly at Julian. "You say Toby is watching down on you, Julian." "Yes, Silas," Julian said, forcing a smile. "I wonder what he sees," Silas mused. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and plugged it into the presentation laptop connected to the massive screen behind them. "We were going to review the Merriweather growth charts," Silas said to the room. "But in the spirit of transparency, a core value of this company, I think we should review the actual cost of Julian's dedication." The screen flickered. The corporate logo disappeared. In its place appeared a scanned document. A bank statement. "This," Silas said, pointing with his cane, "is the company expense account assigned to Julian. Note the entries. The Ritz-Carlton, Tiffany's, Victoria's Secret. Unless the Merriweather client has started wearing lace lingerie, I believe these are misappropriations." A murmur rippled through the room. Julian's face went pale. "Silas, there must be a mistake. We can discuss this in private." "Sit down," Silas barked. The command was so authoritative that Julian actually took a step back. "But money is just money," Silas continued. "Let's talk about time. The night my grandson died." The screen changed. It was the video footage from the Ritz-Carlton hallway. The timestamp was large and read 8:40 p.m. The entire boardroom watched in stunned silence as Julian, in his robe, kissed Vanessa Rourke in the doorway. "At this exact moment," Silas narrated, his voice turning to ice, "my daughter was calling you. Toby was in the back of the car, suffocating. His throat was closing. He was crying for his father. Silas clicked a remote. An image of Julian's phone records appeared. 8:42 p.m. Power down. You didn't miss the call, Julian. You silenced it. You chose your mistress over your dying son. The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Julian looked around, panic rising in his throat. The board members were looking at him with pure disgust. Arthur looked like he was going to be sick. "That's a lie," Julian shouted, desperation taking over. "That video is doctored. This is a setup." "Is it?" Silas asked. "Then perhaps we should discuss the Merriweather account." The screen changed again. This time it was a complex spreadsheet with red highlights. "You committed securities fraud, Julian. You inflated the assets by 40% to trigger your bonus clauses. I've already sent this file to the SEC and the district attorney." Silas leaned into the microphone. "You aren't being promoted, Julian. You are being terminated, and the police are waiting in the lobby." Julian backed away, his hands shaking. "You can't do this. I built this department." "You built a house of cards," Silas said. "And I just blew it down." Two uniformed officers entered the back of the room. Julian looked for an exit, but there was none. The live stream was still running. 3,000 employees were watching him unravel in real time. As the officers cuffed Julian's hands behind his back, Silas leaned in close, so only Julian could hear. "This is just the beginning, Julian. You took my grandson's future. I'm taking your past, your present, and your future. Enjoy prison. I hear the food is worse than the Ritz." Julian was dragged out of the boardroom, screaming that he was innocent, that it was a mistake. Silas stood at the podium, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked at the stunned board members. "Now," Silas said calmly, "does anyone else have any hidden liabilities I should know about?" The fall of Julian Thorne was not a slow decline. It was a free fall from the stratosphere without a parachute. He was denied bail. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Hemlock, who unbeknownst to Julian had attended law school with Silas Sterling, deemed him an extreme flight risk, given the millions he had embezzled and his demonstrated lack of moral tethers. Julian was traded from his Italian silk suits to an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He spent his days in a 6x8 cell at the county lockup, his mind replaying the boardroom disaster on a loop. He had lost everything in 17 minutes. But Silas Sterling wasn't finished. He had destroyed the architect. Now it was time to demolish the accessory. Vanessa Rourke had watched the live stream of the board meeting from her office at Horizon Media. When Julian's infidelity and fraud were exposed, she didn't feel fear for him. She felt an icy panic for herself. The gravy train had just derailed in spectacular fashion. She immediately tried to distance herself. She deleted her social media. She called her landlord to see if she could break the lease on her luxury apartment which Julian paid for. She called the dealership about the Mercedes which Julian paid for. 2 days after Julian's arrest, Vanessa walked into her office to find a cardboard box on her desk. Her boss Marcus was waiting for her. He held up a tablet. On the screen was a still image from the Ritz-Carlton security footage, the kiss in the hallway while a child was dying. "Horizon Media is a family-oriented brand, Vanessa," Marcus said coldly. This is radioactive. The board has already seen it. You're done. Security will escort you out." "You can't fire me for my private life," Vanessa shrilled, her composure cracking. "We aren't," Marcus said. We are firing you for corporate espionage. It seems you used your relationship with Julian Thorne to gain insider information on Sterling Cooper's marketing strategies." Vanessa's jaw dropped. It was a lie, a fabrication planted by Silas's team, but it was unprovable in the short term. It was enough to blackball her from the industry forever. Stripped of her job, her car repossessed, and eviction looming. Vanessa grew desperate. She did the only thing she could think of. She reached out to the victim. She sent an email to Claire. The subject line read, "Understanding the Truth." Claire showed the email to Silas over dinner. Silas read it and chuckled darkly. "The rat is cornered. She wants to cut a deal. She wants to tell you that it was all Julian's idea, that she was a victim of his charm." "I want to see her," Claire said. Her voice was stronger now, the hollow grief hardening into a steely resolve. "Are you sure?" Silas asked. "Yes. I need her to look me in the eye." The meeting took place in a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop 3 towns over. Silas sat at a corner table watching his security detail just outside. Claire sat waiting. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, trying to look humble in jeans and a sweater, but the designer handbag she carried gave away her priorities. She looked tired. The glow of being the chosen one had faded, leaving behind a frightened, selfish woman. Vanessa sat down. "Claire, thank you for meeting me. I don't know what to say about Toby. It's a tragedy." "Don't say his name," Claire said, her voice perfectly level. Vanessa flinched. "Okay. Look, I didn't know. Julian told me you two were practically separated. He said it was a loveless marriage. If I had known about the emergency that night, I would have made him leave." Claire stared at her. She remembered the phone logs Silas had shown her. "You're lying," Claire said. "What?" Silas pulled the data from Julian's phone, Claire explained calmly. "When I called the first 2 times, Julian let it ring. When I called the 3rd time at 8:42 p.m., the exact minute my son's heart stopped, you were the one holding his phone. His fingerprints weren't on the power button for that shutdown. Yours were." Vanessa went pale. We were busy. I just wanted the noise to stop." Claire leaned forward. "You wanted the noise to stop. My son was the noise. You didn't just sleep with my husband, Vanessa. You actively prevented him from saving our child." "Julian is the monster here," Vanessa pleaded, her voice rising. "He lied to both of us, Claire. I'm ruined. I have nothing. He used me." Claire stood up, disgusted. "He didn't use you. You two deserve each other. And don't worry about being ruined, Vanessa. My father hasn't even started on you yet. By the time the IRS is done auditing the gifts Julian gave you with stolen money, you'll be lucky to get a job scrubbing floors." Claire walked away, leaving Vanessa shivering in the warm coffee shop. It wasn't satisfaction Claire felt, but a necessary cleansing. The toxicity had to be purged. The trial of Julian Thorne was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a public evisceration. By the time the trial began, 3 months after his arrest, the media had christened it the Ritz-Carlton betrayal. The narrative was irresistible to the public, a wealthy, arrogant finance executive, sipping vintage champagne and shutting off his phone while his 6-year-old son suffocated in the back of a sedan. The public didn't just want a conviction. They wanted a sacrifice. The courthouse in Greenwich was besieged. Satellite trucks lined the streets, their cables snaking over the wet pavement like black vipers. When the prisoner transport van arrived, the crowd surged forward, screaming insults that the thick steel walls could barely muffle. Inside Department 4 of the Superior Court smelled of lemon polish and nervous sweat. Julian Thorne sat at the defense table, a shadow of the man he had been. The Italian silk suits were gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting gray suit provided by his public defender. His assets had been frozen so quickly and completely by Silas Sterling's legal team that Julian couldn't even afford a private attorney. He looked gaunt, his skin sallow, his eyes darting around the room, desperate to make eye contact with anyone who might offer a shred of sympathy. He found none. In the front row, sitting with the posture of royalty, were Claire and Silas. Claire wore black, her face hidden behind dark, oversized sunglasses, though she removed them when the judge entered. Silas sat like a stone golem, his hands resting on the head of his cane, his eyes fixed on the back of Julian's neck. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He simply waited. The presiding judge was the Honorable Evelyn Hemlock, a jurist known in legal circles as the Hammer. She had no patience for white-collar criminals who thought their net worth was a get-out-of-jail-free card. The prosecution's dismantling. The first week of the trial was a masterclass in forensic accounting. The district attorney, a sharp-witted man named Mr. Danton, didn't start with the death of the child. He started with the greed. Danton projected spreadsheets onto the massive courtroom screens. He walked the jury through the labyrinth of Julian's fraud. "Ladies and gentlemen," Danton said, pacing in front of the jury box. "Mr. Thorne didn't just cook the books. He burned the kitchen down. He inflated the Merriweather assets by 40%. Why to trigger a bonus clause? A bonus he intended to spend on a life he was building apart from his family." The jury saw the receipts. The $800 dinners. The diamond bracelet from Cartier. The lease on the Mercedes. Every charge was a nail in Julian's coffin. But the financial crimes were just the kindling. The fire came when they called the character witnesses. Or rather, the witness to his character's absolute rot. The star witness. On the fifth day, a hush fell over the courtroom as the bailiff opened the side door. The prosecution calls Vanessa Rourke. Julian flinched physically, as if he had been struck. He hadn't seen Vanessa since the night of the arrest. She looked wrecked. The glamorous mistress in the silk robe was gone. In her place was a woman wearing a cheap cardigan, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun, her face devoid of makeup. She looked older, harder, and terrified. She had been granted limited immunity regarding the stolen goods in exchange for her testimony, but her reputation was incinerated. She would never work in marketing again. She was there to save her own skin, and Julian knew it. Vanessa took the stand, refusing to look at the defense table. "Ms. Rourke," Danton began softly, "can you tell the court where you were on the night of November 20th? "I was at the Ritz-Carlton, Westchester," she whispered. "Speak up, please," Judge Hemlock instructed. "I was at the Ritz-Carlton," Vanessa repeated, her voice shaking. "Room 402. "And who were you with?" "Julian Thorne." "What was the nature of your meeting?" "It was a romantic encounter. We were celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Danton pressed. "He told me he had handled his wife, that she wouldn't be bothering us. He said he was going to be promoted soon and then he would leave her." Claire, sitting in the gallery, didn't react. She had already processed the betrayal. Now she was just watching the autopsy of her marriage. Danton walked to the evidence table and picked up a clear plastic bag containing Julian's iPhone. "Ms. Rourke, at approximately 8:40 p.m., did something happen to disrupt your celebration?" Vanessa closed her eyes. A tear leaked out. "Yes." His phone rang. It was on the nightstand. "Did you see who was calling?" "Yes, the screen said Claire, mobile." "And what did Mr. Thorne do?" Vanessa took a shaky breath. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning. "He laughed," she said. "He looked at the phone and laughed. He said, 'She's probably calling to ask where the remote is.' She's helpless without me." A low murmur of disgust rippled through the jury. Julian's lawyer put a hand on Julian's arm to keep him from reacting, but Julian was shaking his head, mouthing, No, that's not true." "Did he answer it?" Danton asked. "No. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again immediately, and a third time. And then, I told him it was annoying," Vanessa sobbed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I told him it was killing the mood. I told him to turn it off." "And did he picked it up?" Vanessa said, her voice dropping to a haunt. "He looked at the screen one last time. It was ringing. He pressed the buttons on the side. He held them down until the screen went black. Then he tossed it onto the duvet and poured more champagne. He said, problem solved." "Problem solved," Danton repeated. He let the words hang in the air like smoke. At that exact moment, 8:42 p.m., Toby Thorne went into cardiac arrest. Objection. Julian's lawyer stood up, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. Prejudicial. Overruled, Judge Hemlock snapped. The timeline is factual. Vanessa was dismissed. As she walked past the defense table, Julian whispered, "You traitor." She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She walked out of the courtroom and out of his life, leaving him alone in the wreckage they had created together. The verdict and the sword. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They didn't need lunch. They needed to wash their hands of Julian Thorne. When the foreman stood up, Julian gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant Julian Thorne guilty. On the count of securities fraud, 14 counts guilty. On the count of grand larceny guilty. It was a clean sweep. The sentencing hearing was set for 2 days later. This was the moment Silas had been waiting for. He had prepared a victim impact statement, but at the last minute, he chose not to read it. He didn't need to speak. The silence of the empty seat at his dinner table spoke louder than any words. Judge Hemlock shuffled her papers and looked down at Julian over the rim of her spectacles. The courtroom was packed. "Mr. Thorne, please stand." Julian stood. His legs felt like water. "In my 20 years on the bench," Judge Hemlock began, her voice resonating with a terrifying calm, "I have seen murderers, gang leaders, and violent offenders, but rarely have I seen a man so completely hollowed out by his own narcissism." She took off her glasses. "You are not being sentenced for the death of your son. That is a burden your conscience must carry, assuming you can find it. You are being sentenced for the systemic theft of millions of dollars. However, the law allows me to consider your character when determining the severity of your punishment within the guidelines." She leaned forward. "You stole from your partners. You stole from your wife. You stole from the shareholders. You lived a lie wrapped in silk paid for by the labor of others. You have shown zero remorse, only self-pity. You are a danger to society not because you are violent, but because you are a parasite." "Your Honor, please," Julian croaked, tears streaming down his face. "I lost my son, too." "You did not lose him." Hemlock cut him off, her voice like a whip crack. "You ignored him. There is a difference. I sentence you to the maximum penalty allowed by federal statutes. 25 years in a federal penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole for 20 years. Furthermore, I am ordering full restitution. Your accounts, your future earnings, and your pension are hereby seized and awarded to the victims of your fraud." She banged the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "Take him away." The gray box. 6 months later. Otisville Federal Correctional Institution was a bleak facility in upstate New York. It was a place of gray concrete, gray skies, and gray men. Julian Thorne was now inmate 89402. The first 6 months had been a brutal awakening. He was not in a country club prison. Because of the high-profile nature of his case and the amount of money stolen, he was in medium security. He worked in the laundry folding rough sheets for 12 cents an hour. His hands, once manicured and soft, were chapped and raw. He had no friends inside. The other inmates knew his story. Prisoners have a code, and crimes involving children even indirectly made you a pariah. He ate alone. He walked the yard alone. On a Tuesday afternoon, a guard banged on his cell bars. "Thorne, visitation." Julian's heart leaped. He had not had a single visitor. His parents had passed years ago. His friends from the finance world had erased his number. He was marched down the long, echoing corridor to the visitation block. He was placed in a booth with a thick plexiglass divider. He sat down and waited. The door on the other side opened. Silas Sterling walked in, followed by Claire. Julian gasped. He almost didn't recognize Claire. She looked healthy. She had cut her hair into a sharp bob. She wore a cream-colored coat. She didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like a woman who had survived a war. Silas looked exactly the same. Timeless. Indestructible. They sat down. Julian picked up the black phone receiver. Claire picked up hers. "Claire." Julian breathed, his voice cracking. "Oh God, Claire, you came." Claire stared at him. Her eyes were dry. "Hello, Julian." "Claire, you have to get me out of here." Julian began, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "It's hell in here. I'm scared. I can't do 25 years. Please, Silas has connections. You can appeal. I'll sign anything. I'll give up all rights to everything. Just please." He stopped. Claire wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with the detached curiosity one might have for a bug trapped in a jar. "We didn't come here to help you, Julian," Claire said calmly. "We came to close the account." "Close the account? What are you talking about? We're family." "We were never family," Silas interrupted, leaning toward his microphone. His voice came through the receiver, tinny but sharp. "You were an investment that went bad. A liability." "Silas, I'm the father of your grandson." "You were a sperm donor," Silas corrected. "A father protects. A father answers the phone." Julian slammed his fist against the glass. "I didn't know. How many times do I have to say it? I didn't know he was dying." "And that is why you are here," Claire said. "Because you didn't care enough to find out." She reached into her purse and pulled out a document. She held it up to the glass. "This is the divorce decree. It was finalized this morning. You didn't contest it because your court-appointed lawyer couldn't find you to sign the papers, so the judge granted a default judgment. I have my maiden name back. I am Claire Sterling again." "Claire? Don't do this." "It's done," she said. She put the paper away. "And there's one more thing." She pulled out a photo. It was a picture of a headstone. Toby Thorne, 2019, 2025. Safe in the arms of the angels. "I visit him every Sunday," Claire said. "I tell him stories. I told him that the bad man can't hurt us anymore." "The bad man?" Julian wept. "I loved him. You loved yourself," Claire said. "And Toby was just an accessory to your ego. Just like me, just like Vanessa." "Vanessa," Julian muttered. "Is she—" "She's working as a cashier at a grocery store in Ohio," Silas said with a grim smile. "We made sure her reputation preceded her in New York. She's living the life she deserves. And now so are you." Silas checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, that cost more than the building they were sitting in. "Our time is up, Julian. We won't be coming back. No one will. You are going to rot in this box, and the world is going to forget you ever existed. That is the true revenge, not pain, obscurity. Silas stood up. Come, Claire. We have a flight to catch. Paris is beautiful this time of year. No! Wait! Julian screamed, standing up, pressing his face against the glass. Don't leave me here, Claire. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Claire stood up. She placed her hand on the glass directly over Julian's palm. For a second, he thought she was reaching out to him. Then she pulled her hand away, wiping it on her coat, as if she had touched something filthy. Goodbye, Julian. She turned and walked out. Silas followed, not even glancing back. Julian stood there screaming into the dead phone line, watching the heavy steel door close on the only people who had ever truly loved him. The lock clicked shut, with a sound of finality that echoed in his ears for the next 20 years. The quiet after the storm. The sun was setting over the Atlantic as the private jet climbed into the sky. Claire sat by the window looking down at the shrinking world below. Somewhere down there in a concrete grid was the man who had ruined her life. But as the plane broke through the clouds into the golden light of the upper atmosphere, she felt the weight lift from her chest. Silas sat across from her reading a newspaper. He lowered it and looked at his daughter. Are you okay? He asked. Claire took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small locket. Inside was a picture of Toby smiling, missing a front tooth. She closed the locket and held it tight. I miss him, Dad, she whispered. Every minute. I know, Silas said gently. We always will. But, Claire said, looking out at the endless horizon, I finally feel like I can breathe again. Julian is gone. The noise is gone. Yes, Silas agreed. The books are balanced. Claire smiled a genuine, soft smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. She looked at the clouds, painting them with the imagination of a mother speaking to her child. Did you see that, Toby? She whispered to the glass. We got him. You can sleep now. The jet banked toward the east, flying away from the darkness and into the starlight. And that is the end of Julian Thorne. A man who had it all, wealth, power, and a loving family, and traded it for a moment of pleasure and a lifetime of regret. Silas Sterling proved that you don't need violence to destroy a man. You just need the truth, a good forensic accountant, and the patience of a predator. Julian will spend the next 2 decades staring at a gray wall, remembering the sound of a phone ringing that he refused to answer. Now, I have to ask you, was this justice? Some people say that living with the guilt is worse than death, while others think Julian got off easy with a prison cell. What would you have done if you were in Silas's shoes? Would you have taken the legal route or something darker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read through them, and I'm really curious to see where you stand on this kind of revenge. If this story moved you, or if you just love seeing karma do its work, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with a friend who needs a crazy story, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to hear our next saga. Thanks for watching, listening. Stay safe. Keep your phone on for the ones you love, and I'll see you in the next one.